All right. Howdy, anyone and everyone watching. This is just a quick education on the new DBAD policy that is being play-tested and implemented throughout Huffle in 2024-2025. My name is Chris, a regular HEMA practitioner, and I also have Casey McClellan here, who is also a regular HEMA practitioner. We created the DBAD system, and we will be the ones taking input and guidance and changing aspects of it as we and others in the league see fit, so that this is the most useful to the league. So, objective of this presentation. We are not going through the entire document. It's only 16 pages long. We highly recommend you just read it. You need to read the document in its entirety to gather a full understanding of the system. And there's literally two Google Sheets as well with the little tables on it. So we'll go through parts of the document and kind of give some overarching themes to get someone familiar with the document going into it. And we'll do a little bit of examples from the table, but this is not going to be comprehensive. So what is the objective of DBAD? What is it? What does it do? DBAD stands for Disqualifications of Behaviors and Advised Disciplines. It targets two specific areas of HEMA, unsportsmanlike conduct and excessive force. It helps provide simple and clear objective standards that tournaments can integrate into their rule set. We take this objective reference source and we use it to standardize penalties that help shape the culture of HEMA tournaments. DBAD is not designed to be exhaustive. It provides non-limiting guidance that can be added onto tournament-specific rule sets. So kind of think of it as like an extra or a downloadable content that you add to your tournament. It doesn't change anything about your tournament's rule sets or guidelines. It only adds on to it. It was shaped by actual HEMA tournament scenarios, common HEMA knowledge, and it reviews other national, international sports guidelines and rules of conduct when we were creating it. It helps define excessive force and unsportsmanlike conduct, and it suggests minimum penalties when these occur. This is meant to be a deterrent overall, so minimum penalties are important for that, but we'll go over that in a minute. So what does this mean for fencers? The major takeaways is that fencers, spectators, and people participating in events in general are all being held to the same basic behavioral standards in and out of the ring during an event. In tournaments, you often get yellow cards or red cards while you're actively fighting. This carries through the entirety of the event. It, however, is event-centric. It does not carry over necessarily into day-to-day practices. Your school has your own code of conduct for everything that happens in regular old classes and sparring and all that. This is just for events. So the important thing to remember is that if you violate DBAD rules, they can follow you. They can and do follow you. And that's important to remember. That's a huge departure from tournament-specific yellow cards and red cards where you get them in that specific pool or that specific tournament, and then the next tournament, it all wipes and resets. DBAD does not. Not necessarily. Cards are still a thing. You can still get them from tournaments. They have nothing to do with DBAD. They're completely separate. Like I said, this is kind of an add-on to tournaments. When you sign up for any event at a school that has formally adopted DBAD, you're agreeing to the behavior guidelines in the document at any and all of the events. So if that school is partnered with DBAD, all of their events are being held to DBAD standards. So you can't act like a fool and then demand a refund if you get kicked out because you didn't realize, if you have to know that any school that has adopted DBAD, all of their events have this attached to it. The most important thing, I think, for some people is that this could potentially affect your HEMA rankings. It would take you being a real jerk for that to happen. But theoretically, it could happen. We'll talk about these specific scenarios and the examples and how this could potentially happen. But I just be aware that this is a huge departure from the tournament settings in general. Participating in an event that utilizes DBAD and winning or placing at an event is subject to the behavior at the event. So, the long story short, and like I said, we'll go more into this later, but if you win longsword on Saturday and then punch a director in the face on Sunday, you no longer won longsword on Saturday. So there is retroactive changes in that same event setting. And most importantly, we need your help to report behavior that you see. Event staff are running the events. Directors are watching fighters. But if you notice a spectator, if you notice a coach that is violating these rules, you need to report them. You need to help shape the culture as well. So what should event staff know? Be familiar with minimum penalties and general behavior that these minimum penalties capture. That comes with reading the document and being familiar with the tables. Fencers violating DBAD rule sets are not always going to announce it to you. They're not always going to be very forthcoming that like, hey, I violated this rule. You have to be on the lookout for violations. These are new. I think we always are vigilant as far as people who are, acting a fool, but if someone is acting a fool, they are not going to sit here and tell you, hey, I'm violating DBAD right now. So you should need to be familiar with what triggers what penalties. Don't be shy. DBAD is rare. Giving DBAD violations is rare and should be rare, but it's important to take action when they do occur. And so you might need to build time into this for your tournament settings. You might need to build a time for your director to take a couple minutes to review the table to give the appropriate penalty to a fighter or a fencer. But overall, this is rare. So don't be too shy when you see something that does stand out, because it shouldn't happen very often. And we're going to be stress testing this at various tournaments in 2024 so that we can refine the process. So staff are always going to be told of any stress testing. They may not be told who is doing the testing, like which fencer it is, but they'll always be told that there's stress testing going on so they can be aware. And I want to just take a moment here to say that, every major, martial arts or sports that you watch, these guys are professionals. They do this full time. They get paid millions of dollars in like the NFL, the NBA, and all of that. And these guys still, get flags and violations and get, stuck in their timeouts and everything. So if these guys that are getting paid millions have this as a career can accidentally or unwittingly violate rule sets, so can we, of course. So don't take it as a slight if you get a violation. This is really just trying to shape something. So on to talking about verbal warnings on that note. Don't do them so much. Verbal warnings don't transfer. They don't go from different pools or tournaments or events. Someone can earn verbal warnings for unsportsmanlike conduct up to 6+ times in a single tournament and not have any negative effects at all. And that pattern needs to be addressed, okay? Otherwise, we can't see it. If we can't see it, we can't address it. So we don't want to mask unsportsmanlike conduct or excessive force in a way that degrades the culture of tournament settings. So that's why this is being implemented in the first place, is to create more positivity in our cultural space. So with that said, this is not meant to shame or blame. This is not meant to be punitive. It is an objective penalty with an appropriate response to the penalty. So don't be this guy. Don't promise to tell nobody. Don't say, ooh, shh, if you're not giving out endless verbal warnings and you're using the DBAD document for behaviors that are on the tables, you're doing your part. And that's what we're trying to do here. Unsportsmanlike conduct. This is straight from the document. You can pause the video and read this, but this is just basically a copy pasta from the document. And it basically just says, it just helps define it and says that it applies to everybody. There's a ton of examples here. We're not going to go over all of them, but needless to say, I just want to take a moment to say, you know, most of the time we're all adults in HEMA settings. You know, when we talk about swearing or taunting, you know, DBAD is not designed to turn this into a stick in the mud. If you are two friends from the same school fighting each other in a tournament and you jokingly taunt each other and everybody is very aware of that context, there's no problem there. This isn't unsportsmanlike conduct. This is camaraderie, right? Similarly, if you're just cussing because you're an adult that swears, this is not what we're talking about. All of these are in the lens and context of unsportsmanlike conduct. So keep that in mind when you're reading these. This is not just taunting of any kind. It is unsportsmanlike conduct in the frame of taunting. Excessive force, again, you can pause this and read through it. It is just the definition in the documents. We have to start somewhere with excessive force. We don't have any like objective test forces that are applied. We need to take measures somewhere. And I believe that this document is pretty bare minimum when it comes to that. So, you know, we're talking about very obvious and very, very prominent injuries when we talk about excessive force. And this is kind of like saying, like, here's where we're starting at, and we're going to build from it there. So keep in mind, of course, excessive force is mostly going to be on fencers, but we theoretically, coaches and spectators could be held to this as well, right? If you punch a director in the face, even if you're not a fencer, that's excessive force. Again, read all of these from the lens of excessive force. Do not say that all pommel strikes are going to be a problem, right? Or that there's never a time that we can throw daggers now, right? Like, this is not what we're talking about, obviously. But morgue slugs, yeah, I can't think of a single time that morgue slugs are okay. So, when it comes to excessive force, you know, we have some examples of these. So even if you think it's not that big of a deal, it could qualify as excessive force, and we need to be aware of what qualifies as excessive force. We do have a list of injury examples in the document. It's not limiting, but if there's something similar to this, for example, an immediate hematoma or bruising that happens immediately after getting hit, if you can already see the welt on an arm or a leg, yeah, you hit too hard, okay? Now, granted, I know there's people who don't wear any leg protection at all, but still, you need to be aware of that as a fencer. You need to help do your part in that. I just want to take a second here that a fencer recusing themselves for precaution does not necessarily determine EF. A fencer can decide to say, yeah, I got hit in the head pretty good. You know, I don't have a concussion or anything. They medically cleared me, but I don't want to risk it. I'm going to stop fighting. That's not necessarily EF, okay? So when you think of this, this is something that might halt a fight, stop a fight, need medical evaluation, that kind of thing. Even needing a medical evaluation may not be EF. It just depends on the fighter and the situation. Flagrant misconduct. We take a minute to really talk about this in the document because egregious or repeated behaviors can warrant skipping the very minimum recommendations. We'll look at the table in a little bit and you'll be able to see this, but you don't necessarily require several situations in order to count as this. For example, if someone is being racist and uses a racial slur at their opponent, this is a flagrant misconduct. You don't need to say, oh, well, you get a first penalty official warning. This is absolutely flagrant misconduct. You can go to the appropriate level that you see fit as an event staff person. Obviously, harassment, sexual advances, slurs, bullying, and physical violence towards people outside the match and other offenses like that obviously count as flagrant misconduct. So, DBAD uses penalties, not cards, like I said earlier. Tournaments use cards for all their rules, for all their stuff. DBAD uses penalties. we hope that this helps prevent any confusion between the two, because they can mix, and we'll look at an example of that in a minute here. But the minimum does not need to be taken into account when issuing penalties. It should match the offense, but there are advised minimums. You shouldn't go below what the chart says should be first. And also, fencers will always be informed of their DBAD status prior to a tournament starting by the event staff. So, and fencers can message DBAD staff, i.e. me and Casey, to check on their status, but be aware that we only track what events hand out. We are not event staff. Events adopt this, we train them on it, and they hand out penalties for offenses as they see fit, but we don't create that. We don't have any change in saying or reversing what those rulings are. This is up to the event staff that are adopting this policy. So if there's something wrong, like they got the wrong fighter and they meant to hand it out to Zach B instead of Zach A, then Zach A can approach the event staff about that. But they wouldn't come to us for that. They would come to the event staff that issued that penalty. So let's look at the unsportsmanlike conduct table. This is not the entire table. This is just a section of it. But we're going to go through the entire penalty system, quote unquote, with some examples for this. So you can see how this works. The minimum verbal warnings. Yes, we can give some verbal warnings for swearing and taunting and heckling, depending on the situation. Like if a spectator is heckling a judge and saying they're doing a bad job or why aren't they watching, this is a first penalty. Like I would not give a verbal warning for this. And we do have something for spectators. I will talk about them in a minute, but let's say that a fencer is not doing the dagger tournament, but their best friend is doing the dagger tournament, and they're saying, hey, why aren't these judges watching this? Like, he clearly hit there, and they're being disruptive. This is a first penalty for that fencer, even if they're not fighting in the tournament. To me, that would be the penalty that I would issue. But for example, if someone says like, oh, fuck, and throws their glove off, and you say, hey, don't be swearing at your opponent. And you're like, no, it wasn't them. They hurt my thumb and I wanted to make sure it was okay. Like, yeah, I mean, we can just give a warning and be like, hey, it's fine. All's well that ends well. We don't need to do a penalty here, right? Obviously, verbal intimidation on opponent or staff, or using intimidation to influence staff, no verbal warnings for that. No official warnings for that, right? And so on and so on, all the way up to permanent bans. So, warnings mean verbal warnings, obviously. This column. They can be issued. They should be rare. I give the example that I already just talked about, a fencer shouting and throwing their glove off. This is a verbal warning and no problem. An example of not using a verbal warning. Joe says, dude, you can handle it, to Michelle, a trans woman. Michelle objects to this misgendering immediately. Joe clarifies he didn't mean to misgender Michelle and that he says dude to everyone. But this is a clear violation of inclusivity policies regardless of how he talks at home. So he might actually say dude to everyone, and actually he might know people that are totally okay with it. But, you use your language at your own risk. If you're just going to sit here and use gendered language to somebody, you have to realize that you could be stepping on toes there. So when you're in an official tournament setting, we need to bring a tiny bit of professionalism to the table and be aware that there are all kinds of other people with all kinds of other lives, and we need to be respectful and sensitive to that. So misgendering someone would not necessarily be account for a verbal warning in and of itself. Now, I say this, but if somebody makes a mistake and genuinely doesn't, and the person says, no, it's fine, it's no big deal, like, blah, 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 I identify as they, and they didn't know, this is all well that ends well, okay? Like, we're talking about somebody who is, just not conforming to the rules. You know, if Joe is told, hey, dude, dude is not okay here, and he keeps saying dude, that's on him, right? So, first penalty. It's tracked for 6 months from the date of receiving the penalty. It does not result in any exchange or match loss. It's an official warning. That's all first penalty is. It's a warning. The example on the screen here is that the red fencer just tells the director, he didn't hit me at all, I blocked it. And the director tells the fencer, no, you got hit, you know? And for arguing back about this, you're getting a first warning. Chill it out with that, you know? This is very mild. You know, 6 months sounds like a lot, but, you know, if you get a 6-month penalty in August, and then you don't fight in another event until October, you're already a little bit halfway through, right? This falling off automatically. So this is just to be aware. Second penalty. I should mention that all of these penalties start the clock over again. So that's all this is saying, is that if you receive a second penalty and you already have a first penalty, you're replacing the clock. So you get that penalty in August, and then you get another penalty in October, that clock starts over. So an example is Michelle gets angry after an afterblow, and it's the second time that they've had an afterblow in tempo, and it's a closed double. Again, she takes off her mask and points aggressively at the other fencer and says, if you don't stop doing that shit, this is a clear violation of intimidation of the opponent section, which recommends a second penalty for even the first offense. So Michelle has had 0 DBAD penalty violations so far, but she now has 6 months of a second penalty violation following her because of that. Because she, you know, and maybe she comes right afterwards to her opponent and she says, look, I got heated. I'm sorry. I did not mean that, blah, blah, blah. I hope they do. I hope they hug it out. That won't absolve her from a DBAD violation. Third penalty. This is where it gets to be heavy, right? So not too bad with the second penalty. You know, your exchange is getting thrown out unless the other fencer would have won, and then it's valid. So basically, you don't get to win that exchange, whether you would have won it or not. That's the second penalty. Third penalty. This is when it gets heavy. You're all the way up to third penalty. You had to have done quite a few missteps, and probably in reality some other verbal warnings and for good measure as well. But this follows you for 13 months, starts from the date received. The big thing about this is that you cannot place. You cannot place in a match, and you get an immediate loss of your match. So even if you were winning your match against, if red versus blue, if red is winning and he gets a third penalty, he loses the match, and he cannot place in the tournament. He cannot fight for third. If you have to fight for third, then you're going to end up in fifth because you cannot possibly place in third. If there's a top 4 or if there's a top 8, it's whatever that tournament's top X are. So, with that said, Joe wins his match against Michelle by 1 point. After the match, he tells Michelle, easiest fight of my life. Why are you even doing this? This is some beginner's tournament you could participate in. And he starts talking like this until Michelle cries over it. And Julie overhears all this and reports this to the director. Joe gets a third penalty for violating the bully and harassment section, and he is counted as losing that match. He cannot continue to fight beyond 4th place, nor place in any DBAD tournament for the next 13 months. Now, if he goes to another school that isn't partnered with DBAD, we can't do anything about that. But in DBAD partnerships, he cannot place, and he cannot place for 13 months. 4th penalty. Not nearly as cool as 4th meal. Immediate ejections from participating in tournaments at the event. If you have a 4th penalty, not only can you not place, you cannot fight at tournaments. You can go to tournaments at the discretion of tournament staff. You have to ask permission to go to tournaments. As a spectator, you cannot teach, you cannot coach. You cannot free spar. You should be there to learn and take classes and to be a supportive and positive figure, and basically demonstrating that you can change whatever behavior got you in that fourth penalty in the first place. That is the whole thing for being there. So with that said, even if you want to attend that tournament for classes, you still have to ask the discretion of the tournament event staff. You need to say, hey, I'd like to participate in this class. I'd like to, come at this in good faith and blah, blah, blah. So if you're committing any offenses as a spectator, you're going to be permanently banned. And also, you don't receive a clean, don't think that, you're going to just disappear for 13 months and come back and do your same thing again. If you receive a fourth penalty, 13 months later, you're downgraded to a third penalty. So you have to really demonstrate over time that you're not going to be continuing this kind of behavior. And so third and fourth penalties are where I say this can affect your HEMA rankings, because obviously if you are a very good fencer, but you have a very crap attitude and you want to make top 3, this may not happen, right? I don't think we have this in our league very much, but it just saying theoretically this could happen. Permanent ban, obviously, you can't come to anything, not just in that school, but in any school that unifies under DBAD. If the school has adopted DBAD, they are all unifying in that ban. You will not be allowed or invited to events from any of those clubs. Now, it's not to say you're going to be kicked out of anyone's school. We don't kick you out of school at all. That's up to the school entirely. That has nothing to do with events. But, yeah, permanent bans are permanent. You can try to petition for a lift, but not within the first 2 years. And there's all kinds of rules in the DBAD document about it. It's not easy to do. And of course, you're not going to come in with a clean slate. You'll come in with a fourth penalty, even if you do successfully lift it, which is going to be pretty rare to get and pretty rare to do. Again, we need event staff, we need spectators, we need fencers to be very familiar with this and help report everything. Tracking this is impossible without reporting. We have a Google Forms to make it easy for table staff to report official penalties that got issued. And we also have an Excel spreadsheet that we're giving access to for all event staff, so that people can see these in real time. Again, nothing to do with tournament rule sets. You can pause and read through this if you'd like, but like I said, this is an add-on to tournaments. It does not take away from tournaments at all. It just augments them. So if tournament staff say, hey, don't listen to DBAD about grappling, grappling's totally allowed here. We've got the safe floor where we can take both feet off the ground. It's all cool. Then cool. But most tournaments don't, and that's why it's there, right? This is just to say, again, this is just copy pasted right from the document. You can stop and take a moment for this if you'd like. But this is just to say that we are very specific about the tournament, what we say. A tournament is a specific weapon system being used during that event. So the longsword tournament is a tournament. The event is the entire thing. That's Rally Open. That's Festival of Heroes. That's Oktoberfest. So it can get muddy. I think, this is going to take time to learn. It's going to take time to adjust to. But just to let you know, an example, a fencer can, if they, for example, they just throw their mask on the ground in anger and because they lost a match, they didn't hurt anybody, but it is unsportsmanlike conduct. So if they go to the next tournament a month later and they do the same thing, yeah, we're going to be considering that flagrant misconduct because they failed to adjust their behavior at the last tournament. But a month later, a spectator that the fencer is with is heckling event staff. We're not holding that fencer responsible for that. We're holding the spectator responsible for that, right? This is not flagrant misconduct on that fencer. That's a completely different thing. So you'll kind of get a feel for it as you go through the document. It's a lot easier than it feels, but this is just an example of how you might think about judging flagrant misconduct in different situations. Quick note on minors: do not penalize minors for their teammates and guardians. So penalties lie with the guardians if the guardian's the one acting up, not the underage fencer. You should only be giving out penalties if, like, it's to help track the main guardian. So if Jimmy Joe is fighting and Papa Joe is watching, and he's acting a fool and heckling the directors and saying, "My son's winning, why aren't you doing this, and why aren't you saying that? What, didn't you see that?" If he has to be removed from the tournament, we may put a penalty on Jimmy Joe just to track Papa Joe. Now, if Mom shows up instead and she's fine, all's well. So, how can we penalize spectators? We can't. We can warn them and we can kick them out. So, of course, spectators that are also fencers, we treat them as fencers whether they're fencing or not. But true spectators that are not fencing at all, have nothing to do with the tournament except for that they're there watching their loved ones or their friends or the strangers because they just walked in. We, of course, if we need to get police involved, we'll get police involved. Any tournament would do that anyways, but we give a verbal warning. We remove them from the tournament, and from there, event staff can decide to ban them from the entire event and or future events. So, they have a very low threshold for what they do. So if an event staff tells someone, "Hey, you're in the wrong zone, you need to be in the safer zone where the spectators are," and then they just straight up ignore that and go right back, it's time right then and there to eject them from the tournament. Like, do not delay. Like, if there is blatant disregard for safety, they need to be ejected. We love spectators. We want them to be there. We want more people to be there, but they have to abide by basic safety rules. So, a bit of a slide, but I think it's a good thing that shows comboing penalties and tournament cards. So, Joe gets hit by Michelle, and Joe calls for a stop because there's an immediate hematoma on his arm. The injury qualifies as excessive force, and Michelle receives a first penalty for that. Joe says he cannot fence for the rest of the tournament, and it is determined that Michelle receives a red card and will also forfeit the match and become disqualified for the rest of the tournament, because that's the tournament-specific rule sets on injuries as well. So Joe later says, "I'm fine. My arm's feeling great again, and I want to re-enter the same tournament because I'm feeling better one pool later." But it's not possible because he doesn't have medical clearance. He was told he cannot fight anymore. So Joe decides to start free sparring instead during the tournament. Michelle sees this and reports the free sparring occurring. Joe is given an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty for abuse of the tournament rule sets and is issued a second penalty due to flagrant misconduct. And the tournament staff opts for his ejection from the remainder of the event day for not following safety procedures. So, because Joe was ejected from the tournament, but his DBAD penalty is officially reported as a second penalty. He wasn't ejected due to DBAD. He was ejected due to the tournament staff saying that this is very flagrant and he's acting a fool. But the DBAD penalty, the second penalty, that will follow him. Michelle will remain with a first penalty, but she's going to be allowed to participate in the next available tournament at that event. She wasn't ejected. There was nothing, this was all well and good. So maybe she can't win dagger, but she can fight in longsword later on that same day, no problem. She's not been ejected. And that's how some scenario might play out with penalties and cards being tied together. Again, this is pretty rare. This is meant to shape culture. It's not a punitive system. So it's meant for positivity. Please come at it with positivity. We're not out here to get fencers or stop people from loving the sport or to make this very rigid, but we've got to have some kind of positive culture shaping, and we need to have an objective system to do that. So that's where we're starting here. We want the space to be available to everyone, and we want it to be safe for everyone. So, you know, instead of choosing scenarios arbitrarily, we've got something that fencers can actually look at and be able to determine why they got this here but not there. It standardizes it and makes it easier for fencers and for event staff. So if you have any questions, of course this is a recording, so you won't have any here, but please, please, please send them to Casey or myself. If you've got questions, comments, feedback, ideas, please send them out. We are going to be sending out surveys regularly throughout the year, asking for feedback on DBAD and how you felt using it, how it worked, how you felt being subjected to it as a fencer at a tournament where it was being stress tested at. We want all the feedback that we can get, because we want this to be shaped by the league, by fencers, by directors, by staff, by everybody. So please, please, please feel free to reach out to us and help shape our little Puffle area of the fencing league. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great evening.